Throughout history, philosophers and theologians have sought to understand the divine through different methodologies. Two of the most influential figures in medieval philosophy, St. Anselm of Canterbury and St. Thomas Aquinas, each developed distinct approaches to the knowledge of God. Magandang araw po sa ating lahat, lalong-lalo na po sa aming instructor and professor on medieval philosophy, si Mr. Mark Joseph T. Calano, Ph.D. I will explore the philosophies of these two great thinkers, their similarities, differences, and their relevance to contemporary religious and intellectual discourse. So let me begin discussing with you St. Anselm. His philosophical approach moves from the subject to the object which is the believing or experiencing person, and the object which is God, necessitating openness and suspension of judgment. His philosophy is rooted in the experience of an encounter, sangkaranasang pakikipagtagpo, rather than in formal argumentation. He posits that knowledge of God arises from the context of prayer, which distinguishes itself from the other forms of conversation, open to transcendence, while simultaneously returning to the self who speaks. In his proslogion, he does not merely seek to prove God's existence through logical argumentation, but invites the reader into an existential and spiritual experience of encountering the divine. Inaanyayahan po tayong lahat na maranasang matagpuan ng Diyos na siyang banal, mabuti at makapangyarihan sa lahat. The two chief objectives of the proslogion are the following. First is to show that God truly exists. Mapatunayan na tunay ngang ang Diyos ay nananahan at umiiral. And to show that He is the summum bonum, the highest good, na ang Diyos ang siyang higit na mabuti. Anselm's approach follows two movements. First, seeking, paghahanap, finding, pagtuklas, desire, pag-ibig o pagnanasa, and it will end up to loving, which is pagmamahal. Then the second one is believing, paniniwala, and it will end up to understanding, which is pag-unawa. Thus, his philosophy is an invitation to engage in a profound conversation between the self and God, pakikipag-ugnayan ng ating mga sarili at sa Diyos. He also asserts that God transcends human comprehension. Si comprehendis non est Deus. If one fully understands, then that is not God. Kung sa tingin mo'y lubusan mo ng naiintindihan o nauunawaan ang mga bagay-bagay, siguro di Diyos ang iyong nalalaman. This underscores the idea that knowledge of God surpasses mere intellectual grasp. True knowledge of God is beyond knowing, perhaps more akin to love than to mere understanding. Hindi sapat ang pag-aalam, hindi sapat ang pagkilala kung wala itong pagmamahal. So after explaining St. Anselm and his philosophy, I will now proceed to St. Thomas Aquinas. His structure on his philosophy within the framework of reason and systematic theology. His Summa Theologiae organizes theological inquiry analogously to the structure of a science, beginning with the foundational question, is there a God? Mayroon bang Diyos? Before defining God, Aquinas first examines whether His existence can be established rationally. His intention is not to prove the existence of God in the sense of providing irrefutable evidence, but rather to show that belief in God is reasonable. He argues that the existence of God is not self-evident. Ibig sabihin, kailangan o nararapat siyang patunayan. If it were, no one could deny God's existence. Then the second one is, the existence of God is demonstrable. Not in the empirical sense of science, but through metaphysical reasoning. He also develops 5 proofs, known as the 5 ways, which demonstrate God's existence based on observations of the world. First is the argument from motion. Second is the argument from efficient causality. Third is the argument from possibility and necessity. The fourth is the argument from gradations of perfection. Then lastly, the argument from teleology, the finality. His approach seeks to harmonize faith and reason. He acknowledges that faith and reason have distinct roles but are ultimately compatible. Fides quaerens intellectum, intellectum quaerens fidem, intellectus quaerens fidem. Rational knowledge does not replace faith, but it supports the credibility of belief. Hindi hangarin ng ating pangatwiran na siya ang ipalit sa pinanghahawakan nating pananampalataya. Bagkus, ito'y tumutulong o umaalalay lamang sa pag-aalam kung mapagkakatiwalaan nga ba ang siyang ating pinaniniwalaan. So, after discussing the two philosophers, let me share the similarities between their philosophies. Despite their different approaches, Anselm and Aquinas share a common belief in God and the human pursuit of truth. First, both Anselm and Aquinas affirm that God's existence is not just an idea, but a reality that deeply shapes human life. Anselm encourages believers to engage in a personal, prayerful relationship with God. Sa madaling sabi, isang malalim na pakikitungo at pakikipag-ugnayan sa Diyos, which divine truth is discovered through intimate experience. Likewise, Aquinas, though grounded in reason, recognizes faith and divine revelation are essential in understanding God. Their shared belief in fides quaerens intellectum, faith seeking understanding, shows that they see faith and reason not as opposing forces, but as complementary paths to truth. Second, both emphasize the limits of human understanding when it comes to infinite nature of God. Anselm argues that if human intellect could fully comprehend God, he will not truly be God. Si comprehendis non ens Deus. Similarly, Aquinas distinguishes between what can be known through reason and what must be accepted through faith, affirming that God's essence is beyond complete human grasp. Now let's examine how Anselm and Aquinas differ. Although both philosophers aim to prove God's existence, their methods are fundamentally distinct. Anselm takes an introspective, prayerful approach, while Aquinas relies on empirical evidence and logical reasoning. Anselm's proslogion is more of a meditation than a structured philosophical argument. His ontological argument states that the very of the idea of a greatest possible being means that such a being must exist in reality. This reasoning does not depend on physical evidence but on pure logic. For Anselm, belief in God is not based on external observations but on an inner realization, a journey from faith to understanding. Isang paglalakbay mula sa pananampalataya, paniniwala at pananampalataya patungo sa pagkaunawa. Aquinas, however, rejects this reasoning and insists that God's existence must be proven through observation and logical deduction. In his Summa Theologiae, he presents the 5 ways, arguments based on motion, causality, contingency, degrees of perfection, and purpose in nature. Unlike Anselm, Aquinas believes that reason alone can lead someone to recognize God's necessity. He emphasizes that knowledge of God begins with the world around us, not with an innate idea within us. In conclusion, Anselm's heartfelt, prayerful approach and Aquinas' logical, systematic method highlight the many ways people seek to understand God. Their philosophies do not oppose each other, but rather complement one another, offering two different yet harmonious paths to the same truth. Anselm reminds us that knowing God is not just an intellectual pursuit, but a deeply personal experience, while Aquinas provides the reasoning that makes belief in God intellectually sound. That ends my examination. That ends my presentation. Thank you for watching.